I never thought 34 years with the RCMP would leave me standing at the edge of my own property on a cold October morning, watching my son shake hands with a stranger in an expensive coat, while my wife sat alone in our farmhouse, trembling and confused. But that's exactly where a lifetime of reading people and situations landed me. The instinct that made me a good officer, the one that made me stop and look twice at things that didn't add up, that instinct saved us. Because I came home 2 days early from a fishing trip, and I saw exactly what my son was doing. My wife and I had spent 40 years building something real. She was a registered nurse for 31 years at the Perth Hospital, the kind of woman who remembered every patient's name and still got Christmas cards from families she'd helped decades ago. I'd served with the RCMP out of the Smiths Falls detachment, working my way from constable to staff sergeant. When we both retired, we moved full-time to the property her parents had left her, 200 acres of mixed farmland and woodlot in Lanark County, about an hour south of Ottawa. The house was old when we got it. I spent 7 summers replacing the foundation, rebuilding the barn, putting in proper drainage across the back fields. My wife planted the kitchen garden, painted every room herself, chose the porch furniture from an estate sale in Carlton Place. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours in the way that only things you've worked for with your own hands can be. We had 2 children. Our son was 38, married, living about 40 minutes away in Brockville. He worked in commercial real estate sales, which should have told me something. Our daughter was 35, sharp as anyone I'd ever met, working as a forensic accountant in Vancouver. She'd been asking me quiet questions for months. Careful questions, the kind you ask when you're worried but don't want to worry the other person. I hadn't understood what she was circling around. I do now. The trouble started after my car accident in March. I'd slid on black ice on County Road 10 and bumped a guardrail. No injuries, minimal damage, not even worth a police report. But my son was at the hospital when they checked me over as a precaution, and something shifted in him that day. He started calling more often, visiting unannounced, asking my wife questions about whether I'd been forgetting things, whether I'd been confused at night, whether I was managing the property. She told me about it afterward, puzzled. "I thought he was just worried," she said. "He seemed so concerned." By summer, he was mentioning memory assessments in casual conversation. He'd found a specialist, he said, someone who worked with older adults, very professional. His exact words were, "You'd want to catch something like that early, Dad, while options are still available." I told him I was fine. He smiled and said, of course you are." In September, he started bringing documents. Forms, he called them. Just planning documents, things every family should have in place. Power of attorney for property, power of attorney for personal care, under Ontario's Substitute Decisions Act. I read them carefully, because I always read things carefully, and something felt off. The language was unusual. The provisions were unusually broad. I told him I wanted our lawyer to look them over. He said there was no rush, just something to think about. Then my wife started having bad days. She'd always been sharp, the sharpest person in most rooms. But through September and into October, she was foggy in the mornings, slower than usual, sometimes unable to find words she wanted. She'd always slept well. Suddenly she was sleeping 10, 11 hours and still tired. She blamed the change of season. I was concerned enough to schedule her a GP appointment, but it wasn't until 3 weeks later that I understood what was actually happening. My son had started bringing her a herbal tea blend, something he said was good for inflammation, something his wife had discovered. My wife drank it every evening because she was polite and because she trusted him. I didn't think anything of it. I should have. 34 years reading people, and I missed it in my own kitchen. In October, he called to say he'd scheduled a capacity assessment for both of us. Not a suggestion, a scheduling. The assessor was a registered social worker, he said, very experienced, everything above board. The appointment was set for the 3rd week of October, while I was planning to be away fishing at Kawartha Lakes with a man I'd served with for 20 years. My wife, still foggy, had apparently agreed to the appointment without fully understanding what she was agreeing to. My fishing partner had to cancel 2 days in. His wife had a fall, nothing serious, but he wanted to be home. I drove back to the farm on a Tuesday afternoon instead of Thursday. I hadn't called ahead. There was no reason to. It was my home. I turned down the long gravel lane just after 2 inches the afternoon and saw an unfamiliar truck parked outside the barn. Black, new, with a magnetic sign on the door I couldn't read from a distance. My son's car was there too, and a third vehicle I didn't recognize. A gray sedan with Ottawa plates. I parked behind the woodshed where the lane curved, out of sight of the barn, the same way I used to park on rural calls when I needed a moment to assess before announcing myself. Old habit. Good habit. I walked the long way around through the apple orchard, staying close to the tree line. Voices were coming from inside the barn. My barn. The one I'd reframed by hand in 2009. The developer, because that's what he was. I could see his jacket now. The logo of a property development firm based in Ottawa was walking the interior space with a measuring tape. My son was beside him, talking fast, animated in the way he got when he was closing something. His wife stood near the door, arms crossed, not speaking. This property has been in the family for generations, my son was saying. But the current owners are getting to the point where they can't manage it. We're in the process of establishing legal care arrangements. Once that's finalized, we'll have authority to list. The developer nodded. What's the acreage again? 204, my son said. Mixed use. The back 40 is protected wetland, but the front fields and the road frontage, that's where your value is. Current market, comparable rural properties in Lanark County, you're looking at anywhere from 1.8 to 2.4 million depending on the buyer. I stood in the barn doorway. All three of them turned. My son's face did something complicated. His wife went still. The developer looked confused. I thought you were in Kawartha, my son said. Clearly, I looked at the developer. Who are you? He introduced himself, named the firm. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. He'd been told the family was aligned on this, he said. He'd been told the capacity questions were already settled. They're not settled, I said. Nothing is settled. I'd like you to leave my property. He left quickly. I heard his sedan on the gravel, gone in under a minute. I looked at my son. I raised him. I taught him to drive, to skate, to change a tire. I sat with him in the hospital when he had his appendix out at 14. I drove 6 hours to see him graduate. I looked at him standing in my barn next to a man who'd been measuring the square footage, and I tried to find the boy I'd known somewhere in his face. Dad, he started, tell me what you just said to that man. We're worried about you. Both of you. You just told him you're in the process of establishing legal authority over this property. That's what I heard. I was 10 feet away. His wife moved slightly toward him. He didn't look at her. We've been watching you both decline, he said. Mom is confused all the time. You nearly drove off the road in March. I slid on ice on a county road. I was doing 40 kilometers an hour. I touched a guardrail. You were assessed at the hospital. As a precaution, I was cleared in 2 hours. His jaw tightened. The capacity assessment is scheduled for Thursday. Cancel it. We can't. You absolutely can and you will. Because there is nothing wrong with either of us. And whatever you're planning here ends today. He crossed his arms. We've been documenting things for months, Dad. Missed appointments, confusion, memory issues. We've spoken to a social worker. We have grounds to pursue a formal review. Under what section? I kept my voice the same way I used to keep it during difficult arrests. Level, specific, certain. Because I know the Substitute Decisions Act, and I know exactly what threshold you need to meet, and you will not meet it because there is nothing wrong with me. Something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt, not exactly. Calculation. I left him standing in the barn and walked to the house. My wife was at the kitchen table. She was in her house coat at 2 inches the afternoon, which she never was. Her tea mug was in front of her, the one my son's wife always brought when she visited, the special blend. She looked up when I came in and her eyes were slow to focus. I sat down across from her and took her hands. "How long have you been drinking that tea?" I asked. She frowned. "What tea?" "The chamomile thing? Since August, I think. She brought it. She said it was good for sleep." "How many cups a day?" "She brought 2 packets each visit. She said 1 in the morning and 1 in the evening." My wife stared at me. "Bob, I need you to think. The paperwork he brought in September, the care documents. What did he tell you they were?" "He said they were just in case," she said slowly. "In case something happened to you. He said you'd had some tests come back, and there might be something to watch." "What tests?" She pressed her fingers to her mouth. "He showed me a letter from a specialist, a neurologist in Kingston. It said you'd been referred for cognitive evaluation." "I've never seen a neurologist in Kingston. I've never been referred to one." The color in her face changed. "He told me you didn't want to worry me," she said. "He said you knew about it, but you were in denial." I watched my wife understand what had been done to her. She sat very still, the way she used to go still before she cried. Then she stood up, and I watched her pour the rest of the tea down the kitchen sink. She washed the mug, stood at the sink with her back to me. "He's our son," she said. "I know." She turned around. Her eyes were dry, but her hands were shaking. "Call your daughter." I called. She picked up before the second ring, which told me she'd been waiting for something. "I need you here," I said. "Not this weekend. Now." A pause. "I found things, Dad. I've been waiting to show you." "How bad is it?" "Bad enough. Can you come?" "I'm booking the flight now," she said. "Don't let them take anything. Don't sign anything. And Dad, get Mom to a doctor today. Not their doctor. Hers. The one she's known for 20 years. I asked her what she meant about the tea. She was quiet for a moment. "I've been reading about valerian root and some other compounds," she said carefully. "In high doses, consistently administered, they can cause fatigue, confusion, impaired cognition, especially in combination with certain things. I'll explain when I get there. Just get Mom seen." I drove my wife to her GP in Perth that afternoon. Dr. Harriet Osei had known her for 18 years. She ran a panel and took notes and asked careful questions, and at the end she said that she was concerned about some of the results and that she'd like to consult with a specialist at the Ottawa General. She asked my wife if anything had changed recently. "Supplements," she said. "Any new supplements?" When I walked back into our house at 5 inches the evening, my son was in the living room. He'd used his key, the one we'd given him years ago for emergencies. "We need to talk," he said. "We do," I agreed. I sat down. He talked for 10 minutes. It was a good performance, careful and concerned, the language of a man who believed he was doing the right thing, or at least a man who'd practiced sounding like one. He talked about our age and the property maintenance and the winters and Mom's confusion and whether we'd really thought through what happened when something went wrong out here, 40 minutes from the nearest hospital. I let him finish. Then I said, "There is a neurologist letter in this house with my name on it that I did not authorize, from a specialist I have never seen, referencing tests I have never had." He didn't flinch, which impressed me in a cold way. "A typo," he said. "The wrong file." He'd been consulting the specialist on behalf of a friend whose father had similar issues. The names must have got crossed. "I've been with the RCMP for 34 years, I said. "I've heard better from teenagers." His wife appeared in the doorway. She'd been in the kitchen. I hadn't heard her come in. She was looking at her husband with an expression I couldn't quite read. "He's been embezzling," she said. The words came out flat and quiet. "From his company. Since January." He turned to her. "Don't." She looked at me. "I found the records last month. I didn't know what to do. I thought if we could just sell the property, get the money, pay it back before anyone noticed." "How much?" I asked. She said a number. It was large enough that I understood the urgency, large enough that I understood why the farm had started to look like a solution. My son said her name like a warning. She sat down on the far end of the couch and looked at her hands. "I thought it was just going to be a loan," she said. "He said you'd be better off in a retirement community anyway. He said it was practically doing you a favor." I told myself that. But today, watching him with that developer, I heard him explain what the capacity assessment was actually for, and She stopped. You didn't know about Mom's tea, I said. She looked up at me with something in her face that might have been genuine horror. What about the tea? My daughter arrived at midnight. She drove from the Ottawa airport in a rental car, came through the door with a messenger bag and a hard drive, and 2 days without sleep already in her eyes. She hugged her mother for a long time at the kitchen table, then sat down and opened her laptop. She had 3 months of work in front of her. She'd been quietly compiling since July, when she'd first noticed discrepancies in conversations with her brother, small inconsistencies that her professional training had flagged. She hadn't said anything to us because she hadn't been certain, and she wasn't someone who said things before she was certain. She was certain now. She walked us through it methodically, the way she must have walked clients through audit findings, clear and specific and without drama. The embezzlement from his employer, documented across 23 transactions. The fake neurologist letter, which she'd traced to a letterhead template purchased from a document design website. The actual neurologist listed on it currently practicing in Calgary and entirely unaware his credentials were being used. The capacity assessor booked for Thursday, a social worker whose license had been flagged by the Ontario College of Social Workers for 2 previous complaints involving undue influence on vulnerable clients. She turned the laptop toward us. He found her through a private forum, my daughter said. There's a whole network of these people, family members who want to establish guardianship, assessors who'll provide the documentation to support it, lawyers who'll facilitate the filings. It's not common, but it's real. And it's been happening more as property values have gone up and families get desperate. My son had been in the kitchen doorway for the last 10 minutes, listening. I'd known he was there. 34 years of knowing where people were in a room. He came and sat down. There was a long silence. The farm has been in your mother's family for 60 years, I said. Her grandfather cleared that backfield by hand. I know. You built a life here too. You learned to drive that lane. You helped me pour the barn foundation. He didn't say anything. I need to understand, I said. Not to forgive you tonight. I'm not there. I just need to understand how you went from our son to the person who put something in your mother's tea. He put his hands flat on the table. It started as borrowing, he said. Genuinely. 1 transaction. A bridge until a commission came through. Then the commission fell through and I had to cover it with another one. He shook his head slowly. It compounds. Everything I tried to fix made it worse. By April, I was in it so deep that if the company audited me, I'd lose everything. The house, the career, everything. And the farm just sat here worth $2 million. He said worth $2 million the way people say a number they've said to themselves 1,000 times in the dark. We sat here, my wife said softly. Not sat. We live here. This is our home. He looked at her. The look lasted a long time. I called the Ontario Provincial Police just before 2 inches the morning. The detachment out of Perth sent 2 officers. They were professional and thorough, which is what I would have expected. They took statements from everyone separately, examined my daughter's documentation, contacted the OPP's fraud unit. They arrested my son at 3:15 inches the morning. Fraud over $5,000, identity theft, administering a noxious substance, criminal breach of trust. His wife was not arrested, but the officers were clear that the investigation would include her knowledge and involvement. My daughter-in-law sat in our living room after the car left with my son in it. She looked like someone had removed the internal structure that had been holding her upright. I didn't know about the tea, she said again. I have to keep saying that because I need you to know it. I believe you, my wife said. I don't know how to come back from this. My wife looked at me across the room, some kind of long-married communication passing between us that I couldn't fully name. I just didn't get in the way of it. You come back from it the same way everyone comes back from things, my wife said finally. 1 thing at a time. That was October. The trial was in February, in the Brockville courthouse. I testified for most of a morning. My wife testified in the afternoon. My daughter presented the financial documentation, walking the court through it with the same quiet precision she'd shown us at our kitchen table. The Crown's case was thorough. My son's lawyer tried to frame it as an extreme response to a genuine family concern, tried to paint the capacity questions as reasonable rather than manufactured. The fake neurologist letter made that difficult. The T made it more difficult. My daughter's documentation made it nearly impossible. My son was sentenced to 4 years in a federal penitentiary, with eligibility for parole after 18 months. The judge cited the vulnerability of the victims, the sophistication of the scheme, and what she called the particular cruelty of using trust as a weapon. She was right on all counts. His wife was not charged, but her knowledge of the financial fraud and her limited cooperation with the scheme, at minimum, in its early stages, cost her. She and my son began divorce proceedings while he was awaiting sentencing. She reached out to us once, a short letter, no excuses, only an acknowledgement of what she'd witnessed and hadn't stopped. My wife read it twice and put it on the kitchen counter. She hasn't thrown it away. There was a restorative justice component. The Crown and the judge both supported it, and it was something I asked for specifically. Not because I expected it to fix anything, but because I thought it mattered, for reasons beyond us. Lanark County held a community session on elder financial abuse in March, partnered with the OPP, the County Social Services Office, and the Ottawa Area Legal Aid Clinic. My son had to attend and speak as a condition of the restorative process. It was not optional. He stood at the front of a meeting room in Perth, in front of maybe 80 people, neighbors, retired community members, healthcare workers, people who'd known my wife for years and known me from my time with the detachment. He was thinner than he'd been. He looked like a man who'd spent several months facing something he'd been avoiding for longer. He said his name. He said what he'd done. He said it plainly, without the layering of justification that had characterized everything up until then. My parents built their property together over 4 decades. My mother's family had held that land since the 1960s. I looked at it, and I saw money I needed. He paused. I told myself it was practical. I told myself they'd be comfortable somewhere else. I told myself a lot of things because I needed them to be true. But the truth is, I knew they didn't want to leave. I knew my mother's health problems were something I was causing, and I kept going anyway. There was no applause. There was the kind of silence that has weight to it. He looked at us in the front row, my wife and I, the way you look at people when you understand you've done something that can't be undone by looking. I can't give back what I took from you, he said. I don't mean the farm. I mean the years we won't have now, the relationship. I can't give that back. I know that. I'm just telling you that I see it. He sat down. My wife didn't speak to him afterward. I didn't either. We drove home along County Road 10, the same road I'd slid on in March, and I watched the fields go by in the gray March light and didn't say much. She was quiet until we turned down the lane. I keep thinking I missed something, she said. Some sign. We trusted him. That's not a failure. That's what you do with your children. We should have seen it. Maybe. I pulled up to the house and turned off the engine. Or maybe some things only become visible once they've already happened. Doesn't mean we did anything wrong. She looked at the kitchen garden, which she'd be planting in May. The porch furniture she'd chosen from the estate sale. All of it still here. Should we forgive him? She asked. Not today. Someday? I don't know yet. I want to be honest rather than promising something I'm not sure of. She nodded slowly. That's fair. My daughter drove down from Ottawa, where she'd been working remotely since January, not willing to be far. She stayed for the weekend, cooked a roast on Sunday, and sat at our table until 11 at night just talking, the way we used to when she was home from university, and the conversation felt like it could go anywhere. In April, a letter came. I knew the handwriting on the envelope. My wife picked it up from the counter and held it a long moment. Are you going to open it? She asked. Not today. She set it on the hall table. We walked past it for a week. Then I moved it to the desk in the study, the one where I used to file 20 years of duty notes and case documents. It sits there now. I haven't opened it. I haven't thrown it away. My daughter called on a Tuesday evening in early May and mentioned she'd heard from him once, a short message through a third party, asking how we were. What did you tell him? I asked. I said I'd pass it along, she said. That's all I promised. That's your call, I told her. He's your brother. I'm not going to decide that for you." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you think it's possible for someone to come back from something like this? I mean, really come back?" I looked out the window. The kitchen garden had been turned over. The apple trees were in early blossom. The barn stood where I'd rebuilt it, solid as anything I'd ever put my hands to. "I think it depends on what they do with the time," I said. "Not what they say, what they actually do." She said she'd think about that. The Thanksgiving long weekend came in October, almost exactly a year after I'd driven down that lane and found a developer measuring my barn. My daughter came home. She brought a friend from Ottawa, a quiet man who helped me split firewood without being asked, and seemed to understand that some silences don't need filling. We cooked. The kids from next door's family came by in the afternoon the way they always had, drawn by the smell of pie and my wife's inability to close a door when there were children nearby. After dinner, I walked out to the backfield as the sun dropped. The light came across the open ground the way it did in October, low and golden and with no pretense, the honest light of things as they are. My wife came out and stood beside me. "We made it," she said. "We did. You think we'll be okay?" I looked at the farm, the fields we'd shaped and kept, the garden she tended, the tree line where I'd counted 200 acres of things we'd spent a lifetime being responsible for. The light was coming through the maples, and I thought about my father-in-law, who'd cleared this ground before we'd ever set foot on it, and I thought about the grandchildren who weren't here yet, but might be someday, who might learn to walk this same path between the house and the backfield. "Yeah," I said, "we'll be okay." She slipped her hand into mine the way she'd been doing for 40 years. We stood there while the light changed, and the Canada geese moved south overhead in long, loose formations, the way they did every October without fail, reliable as the season itself. The farm was still ours. Everything we'd built with our own hands was still standing. And whatever came next, we'd face it the same way we'd faced everything else. Together, clearly, without surrendering a single thing that was ours to keep.